What would you do if you saw a stranger pass a note that simply said, "Help me"? For one family in a small-town diner, that silent cry for help wasn't ignored. It was intercepted by the only people the victim's captor wasn't watching: three 6-year-old girls. Her name was Alina, and for weeks, she had been living a nightmare. Seated across from her captor in that red vinyl booth, she was a prisoner in plain sight. And as the man who controlled her every move turned to wave down a waitress, she saw one desperate chance. She scrawled 2 words onto a paper napkin and let it fall, but the man she was trying to reach never saw it. Instead, the fluttering square of paper was caught by the quick, tiny hands of 6-year-old Chloe. She and her sisters, Emma and Sophia, were under the next booth, playing a game of make-believe. Chloe smoothed the napkin on her knee. She could read the 2 words written there in shaky, smudged ink. "Help me." She looked up at the woman who had dropped it. Alina's eyes, wide and frightened, met hers for a fraction of a second before snapping back to the man across from her. He was in his 40s, with a thin, forced smile. He was talking to Alina in a low, calm voice, but his hand was wrapped tightly around her wrist under the table. The triplets' father, David, was a paramedic. He was sitting with his back to the scene, scrolling on his phone, trying to enjoy a rare quiet moment while his daughters played. To him, the diner was just a Thursday night pit stop after soccer practice. The red vinyl seats, the smell of coffee and grease, the clatter of plates, it was the soundtrack of normal life. But for Alina, this public space was her cage. She was 22. Just 2 months ago, she'd answered an ad for a live-in nanny position in a city 600 miles from home. The man who interviewed her, Victor, seemed kind. He offered a good salary, a room of her own. It was a fresh start. But the moment she got into his car, the rules changed. He took her phone. He said it was for her safety, for the privacy of the family. Then he drove her to a different state. The job didn't exist. Instead, Victor moved her between cheap motels, never staying long. He told her she owed him money for the travel, for food, for the clothes he bought her. The debt kept growing. He monitored her every move. And when she tried to leave once in a gas station bathroom, he found her, dragged her back to the car, and broke 2 of her fingers as a lesson. She hadn't spoken a word since. Not from a physical impairment, but from a terror so deep it had stolen her voice. Tonight at the Liberty Bell Diner, he'd ordered for her a club sandwich she knew she wouldn't be allowed to eat. He was explaining the new arrangement. There were friends, he said, who would be visiting their motel room later. They were going to help pay off her debt faster. She felt the world tilt. She saw her chance when he turned, waving impatiently for more ketchup. The napkin was right there. The pen was in her jacket pocket. She acted on pure, desperate instinct. Under the booth, Chloe showed the napkin to her sisters. Emma's eyes went wide. Sophia, the most pragmatic, put a finger to her lips. They had a secret, a big one. They didn't fully understand the words, but they felt the fear radiating from the pale woman in the big green jacket. It was the same feeling they got when they saw a dog caught in a fence, a silent, straining panic. Chloe knew they had to tell Dad, but the man with the thin smile was right there. So she did what any clever 6-year-old would do. She crawled out from under the booth, climbed onto the seat next to her father, and slid the napkin onto his lap under the table. Then she whispered in his ear, her breath tickling his neck. "Daddy, the sad lady dropped this. She needs help." David looked down. The 2 words hit him with the force of a physical blow. His paramedic training kicked in, a cold, clear focus washing over the fatigue. This wasn't a scrap from a child's game. The paper was a diner napkin. The pen was a cheap ballpoint, the kind motels leave by the phone. He didn't turn around. He didn't stare. He kept his face neutral, his body relaxed, but his mind was racing. He saw the couple now in his peripheral vision. The man was lean, dressed in a clean but worn polo shirt. He was leaning forward, talking intently. The woman, Alina, was hunched, her shoulders curved inward. She was picking at the edge of her placemat, her movements small and tight. David recognized the body language of extreme control. He'd seen it at accident scenes, in people trapped by wreckage. His own daughters were now quietly coloring at the table, but they kept stealing glances at the next booth. They were part of this now. The man, Victor, was dangerous. David was sure of it. Confronting him here could put everyone in danger, but letting them walk out the door might mean Alina would disappear forever. He had to get help without triggering a violent reaction. He subtly pulled out his phone, angling it below the table. He opened his camera, switched to video, and carefully, slowly, raised it just enough to record the couple's reflection in the chrome napkin dispander on their table. He needed evidence. He needed a face, a license plate, anything. He texted his partner, another paramedic named Mark who was off duty and lived nearby. Liberty Bell Diner, Booth 7, possible trafficking situation. Need you to call 911, describe me and the triplets, tell them to send units silent approach. Man is suspect, white polo, late 40s. Woman in distress, dark hair, olive jacket. Do not approach, just make the call. He hit send. His heart was hammering. The waitress came by with the check for Victor's table. Victor paid in cash, counting out exact change, leaving no tip. He stood up, pulling Alina up by her arm. It was time to go. David's blood ran cold. The police weren't here yet. He couldn't let them leave. He made a split-second decision. As Victor guided Alina past their booth, David deliberately knocked his full glass of soda off the table. It shattered on the floor with a loud crash, ice and brown liquid splashing across the linoleum. Everyone in the diner turned. Victor flinched, his grip tightening on Alina. David stood up, a picture of embarrassed fatherhood. "Oh geez, I am so sorry girls, my fault." He looked directly at the waitress, then at Victor and Alina, blocking the aisle slightly with his body. "So sorry folks, didn't mean to startle you. Let me help clean this up." It was a delay. A clumsy, chaotic, but perfectly believable delay. The waitress sighed and went for a mop. Victor's face tightened with irritation, but he couldn't just shove past the man apologetically trying to orange his triplets away from the broken glass. For 30 seconds, they were stuck. And in those 30 seconds, David looked right at Alina. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His eyes said, "I see you, hold on." Alina's breath hitched. A flicker of something, hope, terror, crossed her face. Victor noticed the exchange. His eyes darted from David's face to the triplets, then down to the mess on the floor. His expression shifted from irritation to a cold, calculating suspicion. He'd been in control for so long, he could sense when the rhythm of his control was off. He pulled Alina closer, his voice a low hiss only she could hear. "What did you do?" Outside, the first faint echo of a siren cut through the distant hum of highway traffic. It was miles away, heading elsewhere, but Victor heard it. His head snapped toward the diner's plate glass windows. Then his gaze swept back to David, to the triplets now clinging to their father's legs, to the napkin that was no longer in Chloe's hand. His eyes locked with David's, and in that moment the mask of normalcy shattered completely. Victor knew. Victor's hand, still clamped on Alina's wrist, yanked her backward, away from David and the spilled drink. He didn't run. Running draws attention. Instead, he shifted, putting Alina between himself and the diner's front door, using her as a shield. His friendly facade was gone, replaced by the cold, flat gaze of a predator assessing an immediate threat. "Move," Victor commanded David, his voice low but devoid of any pretense. "Get your kids and move, now." David didn't back down. He gently pushed the triplets behind him, putting his own body between them and Victor. The paramedic in him was calculating. Victor's build, his stance, the potential for a concealed weapon. The father in him was screaming to get his daughters to safety, but the human being in him couldn't leave Alina. "I think the lady should stay," David said, keeping his tone calm, conversational. "The police are on their way. We can all just wait here nicely." The word police was a gamble. It could de-escalate or it could trigger a violent flight. For Alina, it was a lifeline. She stopped resisting Victor's pull for a split second, her body going rigid with a hope so acute it was painful. Victor's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the door, then back at David. A nasty smile twisted his lips. Police? For what? My girlfriend and I are having a disagreement. It's a private matter. He shook Alina's arm slightly. Tell him, El, tell this nice man we're fine. All eyes turned to Alina. The entire diner was watching now, the waitress frozen with her mop, a family in a corner booth staring, a trucker at the counter slowly putting down his coffee mug. The pressure was a physical weight on her chest. Victor's fingers dug into her wrist, a silent promise of worse to come if she spoke. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out but a dry, silent gasp. She tried again, her throat working, but the terror had built a wall of ice around her voice. She shook her head helplessly, tears beginning to streak through the pale makeup on her cheeks. See, Victor said, the smile still in place but never reaching his eyes. She's upset, emotional, we're leaving. He began to back toward the door, dragging Alina with him. David took a step forward. The napkin says otherwise. That stopped him. Victor's gaze dropped to Chloe, who was peeking out from behind her father's leg, the crumpled evidence still partially visible in her small fist. Rage, pure and unadulterated, flashed across his face. He'd been undone by a child. You little, he began, but he never finished the sentence. The blare of sirens, now unmistakably close and growing louder, finally erupted into the parking lot. Red and blue lights strobed through the diner's windows, painting the shocked faces of the patrons in alternating flashes of color. Two police cruisers skidded to a halt outside the main entrance. Victor's calculus changed instantly. Flight was now the only option. He shoved Alina hard, sending her stumbling into David and the triplets, creating a tangle of limbs. In the chaos, he bolted, not for the front door but toward the back of the diner, past the stunned kitchen staff, and out the rear emergency exit, which slammed shut with a deafening bang. David caught Alina, who was sobbing soundlessly, her body trembling violently. It's okay, you're safe, he murmured, the automatic reassurance of his profession taking over. He looked at the triplets. Girls, stay right here with this lady. Do not move. He made sure Alina was steady, then took off after Victor. Out back in the dank alley lined with dumpsters, Victor was fumbling with the keys to a nondescript silver sedan. David, without a second thought, tackled him. They went down in a sprawl of limbs on the wet asphalt. Victor was wiry and strong, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. He clawed at David's face, trying to knee him in the ribs. But David had size and training on his side. He'd subdued combative patients on the way to the hospital. He pinned Victor's arms, using his weight to hold him down as the back door of the diner burst open again. This time, it was the trucker from the counter, followed by the short-order cook wielding a heavy metal spatula. Got him, the trucker grunted. Got him, David panted. Minutes later, the diner was a crime scene. Police officers separated witnesses. Victor, handcuffed and sullen, was read his rights and placed in the back of a cruiser, his eyes burning holes through the window at the diner where his control had evaporated. An ambulance arrived for Alina, who was wrapped in a thermal blanket, a female officer sitting with her, speaking in soft, gentle tones. David gave his statement, showing the officer the video on his phone. The napkin was bagged as evidence. The triplets, wide-eyed and suddenly very quiet, were interviewed by a kind detective who knelt to their level. Chloe handed over the napkin as if it were a sacred object. It seemed like a clean, swift resolution. A victim rescued, a captor apprehended, heroes in the form of a dad and his intuitive kids. The local news would do a feel-good segment, but that's not where the story ends. In fact, it's not even where the real story begins. Because when the police ran Victor's name, alarms didn't just sound, they screamed. His real name was Victor Malikov, and he wasn't a lone predator. He was a low-level facilitator for a network that stretched across 3 states. His job was to recruit and break in new victims, holding them at transient locations like motels and truck stops before moving them up the chain. He was a cog, but a cog with a ledger. Sitting in an interrogation room under the harsh fluorescent light, Victor realized the jig was up. Facing multiple felony charges, he decided to talk. He offered a trade, information for leniency, and the information he gave was a name that made the detectives' blood run cold. He gave them the name of the man he answered to, the man who managed the movement of inventory through the region. A man the authorities had been after for years but who was always a ghost, a voice on a burner phone, a shadow in financial records. His name was Aris Thorne. Back at the hospital, Alina was finally safe, but she was also the key witness to a much larger machine. A dedicated victim advocate sat with her, and slowly, with immense courage, Alina began to use her voice again. It was a whisper at first. She described the motels, the cars, the other girls she'd glimpsed in passing. She described the rules, the punishments, the constant fear. And she described the phone calls Victor would make, reporting to someone he called the manager. The pieces were coming together, but they painted a terrifying picture. Aris Thorne's network was sophisticated. They used legitimate businesses as fronts, a chain of laundromats, a landscaping company. They changed their methods often, and they had a strict rule. If a facilitator was compromised, like Victor, any inventory in their care was to be immediately relocated or, in the worst-case scenario, disposed of. Which meant Alina was not safe. Not yet, and neither potentially were David and his family. David learned this the next day when the lead detective, a weary man named Hayes, visited him at his home. "Mr. Mitchell, you did an incredible thing," Hayes said, not sitting down. "But I need you to understand the situation. Malikov gave up a big fish to save his own skin. This fish has resources. He will know Malikov was arrested at that diner. He will know a civilian you were involved. He will know there's a witness, Alina." David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked into the living room where the triplets were building a pillow fort, oblivious. "Are you saying we're in danger?" "I'm saying we have to operate on the assumption that you could be," Detective Hayes said. "We're putting a patrol car outside for a few days. We're relocating Ms. Petrova to a safe house. But these people, they're patient, and they don't like loose ends. You and your girls are a very public loose end." The fear was different now. It wasn't the acute, adrenalized fear of the diner confrontation. It was a slow, creeping dread that seeped into the walls of his home. Every strange car that drove down their quiet street, every wrong number phone call, took on a sinister meaning. David decided to be proactive. He called Mark, his paramedic partner, and a few other close friends. He installed new motion sensor lights. He talked to the triplets in a way they could understand, not to scare them, but to instill caution. "We have to be like secret agents for a little while," he told them. "We notice things. We stick together." Meanwhile, the investigation into Aris Thorne was accelerating. With Victor's information and Alina's testimony, financial analysts started following a money trail. They found shell companies, suspicious cash flows through the front businesses, and patterns of vehicle purchases that matched the timeline of disappearances from truck stops and bus stations across the Midwest. They were building a case, but building a case and making an arrest are two very different things. Thorne was insulated. He had lawyers on retainer. He had no direct contact with the victims. Proving he gave the orders, that he was the architect, was like trying to grab smoke. Then a break came from an unexpected source: the triplets. A week after the diner incident, the family was at a large, crowded park. David was watching the girls play on the jungle gym, his senses on high alert. Chloe, Emma, and Sophia were playing their favorite game, Diner Rescue. They took turns being the sad lady and the hero dad. David watched with a pained smile. He was about to call them over when he saw a man. He was sitting on a bench about 50 yards away, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, reading a newspaper. He hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. He wasn't watching the kids. He was just there. But something about his posture, the way he seemed to be taking in the entire park without moving his head, set off every alarm bell in David's mind. He didn't confront him. He didn't stare. He calmly walked over to the jungle gym. Okay, secret agents, mission time. We're going to leave the park using Plan B. Remember Plan B. The girls, sensing the change in his tone, immediately stopped playing. Plan B was the code for walk calmly to the second closest exit, not the main one, and hold hands. They formed a line, each taking a sister's hand. David led them, his heart hammering, toward a side gate that led to a residential street, not the main parking lot. He risked one glance back. The man on the bench was now on his phone, looking not at them but in the opposite direction. It could have been nothing, a paranoid father's overreaction. But as they turned the corner, David saw a dark sedan parked near the side gate. Its engine was running. He shepherded the girls quickly down the street, pulling out his own phone to call Detective Hayes. He described the man, the car. Hayes was silent for a moment. The sedan matches a vehicle registered to one of Thorne's shell companies, he said, his voice grim. It was a Scout. They were confirming your routine, your vulnerabilities. They know about the girls. The game had just changed. This was no longer about a random act of kindness in a diner. David and his family were now active targets in a shadow war against a criminal enterprise that wanted to silence the chain of evidence that led to its door. The safe, ordinary world of school runs and soccer practice had vanished, and the only way back was to go through the danger, not around it. Detective Hayes laid out the brutal truth in David's living room that night. They've seen your girls. They know your routine. They know you're the linchpin that connects Victor to Alina to our investigation. You are now a liability to Aris Thorne, and he eliminates liabilities. David's choices were stark. Enter witness protection with his daughters and disappear forever, or become active, strategic bait to help take the network down. David refused to run, uprooting the triplets, erasing their identities, living in fear that felt like letting Thorne win. But using his family as bait was unthinkable. There had to be a third way. He proposed a counter-strategy to Hayes. Instead of hiding, they would appear to retreat. He would take a sudden, unexplained leave from work. They would pack suitcases in plain view. They would let any watchers see a family preparing to flee in panic. The goal was to make Thorne's network believe the threat was leaving, forcing them to pause to reposition. It would buy time. Meanwhile, the investigation hit a wall. The money trail led to a web of offshore accounts. The shell companies were owned by other shell companies. Thorne was a phantom. They needed a break from inside. They got it from the most unlikely of places, Viktor Malakov's jail cell. Fearing Thorne's long reach even behind bars and seeing no further concessions from the prosecutors, Viktor decided to truly talk. He offered up a gold mine, the location of a storage unit, not in his name but rented under one of Thorne's aliases. Viktor had been tasked with dropping off a package there once. He remembered the unit number because it was his daughter's birthday, 1427. A warrant was secured. Inside the climate-controlled unit, detectives didn't find cash or drugs. They found Thorne's archives, ledgers written in a meticulous numeric code detailing transactions, movements, and initials of victims, USB drives containing encrypted client lists, and most crucially, a stack of fake IDs and passports, not for Thorne, but for the women he controlled. It was a treasure trove, but it was also a snapshot from 6 months ago. Thorne would have already shifted his methods. Back at the safe house, Alina was slowly piecing her life back together with the help of a trauma counselor. She was shown photographs from the storage unit. One image made her go still. It was a picture of a driver's license for a Samantha Green. The photo was of a girl Alina had shared a motel room with for 2 terrifying days, a girl who called herself Mia. Mia had been taken from a bus station in Cleveland. She had a small, distinct tattoo of a butterfly on her wrist, visible in the license photo. Alina hadn't known her real name until that moment. She broke down, but then she grew determined. She wanted to testify. She wanted to help find Mia and the others. The coded ledgers were sent to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Cracking the code took 72 hours. The numbers corresponded to dates, highway mile markers, and amounts of money. It was a travel and transaction log. Cross-referencing the dates with missing persons reports created a map of misery across 4 states. It also revealed a chilling pattern. Thorne's network had a mole. Someone was feeding them information on law enforcement movements. The revelation sent a shockwave through the task force. Every move they'd made had potentially been compromised. The park scout. They might have been tipped that the family would be there. This changed everything. The threat wasn't just external, it was coming from within the very system designed to protect them. Detective Hayes had to act without informing his own chain of command. He trusted only 2 people, his direct supervisor, Captain Miller, and David. They devised a new plan, a deception within a deception. They would leak false information through a channel they suspected was compromised. The logistics of moving Alina to a new, more secure federal facility in another state. The convoy route, the timing, the vehicle descriptions, all would be carefully crafted bait. The goal was not to move Alina but to force Thorne's hand. If he had a mole, he would learn of this transfer. If he wanted to silence Alina, this would be his last, best chance to intercept the convoy on a remote highway. And if he took the bait, the task force would be waiting, not to protect a convoy, but to catch an entire hit team and hopefully trace them directly back to Thorne. David's role was to sell the first deception, the family's panic, while staying utterly in the dark about the second. For his and his daughter's safety, he couldn't know about the sting operation. He just had to play his part perfectly. He did. He called the triplets' school, citing a family emergency. He was seen loading the car with luggage. He stopped his mail. To any observer, the Mitchell family was leaving town. On the day of the fake transfer, tension in the task force's makeshift command center was a live wire. Alina, unaware she was the center of a trap, was actually moved to a different safe house within the city hours earlier. The convoy that rolled out was a decoy. 2 unmarked cars with heavily armed marshals, and an armored transport vehicle with no one inside but a driver. They drove the published route, a highway stretch with limited exits, perfect for an ambush. Every law enforcement officer on the operation was from outside the county, vetted by Hayes and Captain Miller personally. They waited. 30 miles out, the convoy approached a long, wooded overpass. As it passed under, 2 vehicles, a tow truck and a van, pulled out from a hidden service road, blocking the highway front and back. Men in tactical gear, armed with rifles, emerged. It was a professional, military-style interception. But before a single shot was fired, the trap was sprung. State police helicopters rose from behind the tree line. Unmarked cars hidden in the woods flooded onto the road, sirens screaming. The hit team was surrounded, outnumbered, and captured within minutes. Among the 6 men arrested was a face that made Detective Hayes's blood run cold. Officer Ben Carter, a 12-year veteran from a neighboring jurisdiction who had attended 2 interagency briefings on the Thorne case. The mole had been found. In interrogation, Carter, facing life in prison, folded quickly. He wasn't ideologically committed. He was financially desperate, deep in gambling debt. Thorne's people had approached him 2 years prior. He confirmed Thorne's paranoia and operational genius. Thorne never met anyone in person. He used encrypted, disappearing message apps. Payments were in cryptocurrency. But Carter did have one critical piece of information. Thorne was obsessed with control. He demanded proof that problems were eliminated. He would only communicate directly for a confirmation of resolution. And the resolution of the Alina problem was to be confirmed that very night via a secure video call. Thorne wanted to see proof. This was the opportunity they'd been praying for. They had a window, just hours, to turn one of the captured gunmen, get him to wear a wire, and have him deliver the proof Thorne demanded, all while tracing the call. They chose the youngest of the hit team, a scared 20-year-old kid named Joey who'd been recruited from a gang and was in way over his head. They offered him a deal, wear a wire, follow their script, and his cooperation would be noted. They staged a photo, Joey standing over a bound and gagged figure, an officer in a wig in a warehouse, holding a gun. It was the proof Thorne required. At 10 p.m., using a burner phone provided by Carter, Joey made the video call. The task force, along with federal agents, watched on a monitor, their breath held. The call connected. The screen remained dark for a moment, then a digitally distorted voice came through. "Show me." Joey, sweating, panned the camera to the victim on the floor. "It's done. The girl is gone. The problem is solved." There was a long pause. Then the distorted voice spoke again, slow and deliberate. "Joey, look at the victim's left hand." The officer on the floor, in the stress of the moment, had forgotten a crucial detail. Alina had 2 broken fingers from her initial captivity, which had healed slightly crooked. The hand of the officer on the floor was unblemished. "That's not her," the voice said, calm and final. "You're compromised." The call ended. The trace was incomplete. Thorne was using a sophisticated relay system. He was gone. Back in the command center, the mood was grim. They had the hit team, they had the mole, but Thorne had slipped away. He knew the authorities were closing in. He would go to ground, dismantle his network, and rebuild somewhere else. Alina would never be safe. David and his family would be looking over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. It felt like a Pyrrhic victory. But as they were packing up the equipment, an analyst made an offhand remark. "He's a control freak, right? He had to see the proof himself. He's paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone." She pulled up the geodata from Carter's and Joey's phones. The call was relayed, but the final node, the signal strength, suggests the receiving device was within a 20-mile radius of the city. He didn't run. He's still here. He wanted to be close enough to verify the hit himself in case his men failed. Aris Thorne wasn't hiding in a foreign country. He was in their own backyard, watching, controlling, believing he was still one step ahead. The hunt was not over. It had just become a race against time to find a ghost before he realized his last safe house had been discovered. The realization was an electric jolt to the weary task force. Aris Thorne wasn't a mastermind hiding on a tropical island. He was a control freak who needed to be close enough to smell his own victory. He was here, in the city, likely monitoring police frequencies, watching the news, feeling smugly secure in his anonymity. To catch him, they had to make him break his own most sacred rule. They had to make him come out into the light. They analyzed his psychology from the ledger, the failed video call, Carter's testimony. Thorne's empire was built on the illusion of his own omniscience. He believed he was smarter than everyone. The victims, his underlings, the police. His greatest weakness was his need to personally verify that his will had been executed. The botched confirmation about Alina would fester in his mind like a poison. He would be desperate for real closure. The plan was audacious. They would give him exactly what he wanted, but on their terms. Using the mole, Officer Carter, they would feed a new story. The botched highway interception had spooked the task force. Alina Petrova was being medically sedated for transport due to a psychotic break, and would be moved at dawn via a private medical van from a discreet side entrance of the county hospital. It was a quieter, softer target. The information would be slipped through Carter's usual channel, with an air of frantic secrecy. The location was key. The hospital's service entrance opened onto a short, dead-end alley. It was a perfect kill box. Thorne would have to send someone, or come himself, to finally tie up the loose end. Every rooftop, every window overlooking that alley was occupied by federal snipers and surveillance teams hours before dawn. The medical van was a prop, manned by 2 undercover U.S. Marshals. As a gray, pre-dawn light began to bleed into the sky, the alley remained still. Tension in the command post was suffocating. Had he seen through it? Was he too paranoid? Then movement, not a vehicle. A single figure dressed in dark hospital scrubs and a surgical mask pushing an empty wheelchair. He approached the service door from inside the hospital, not from the street. He infiltrated the building itself, hours earlier, hiding in plain sight. He was checking the stage before the play began. The figure scanned the alley, the van, his body language calm, professional. He then turned and went back inside. "That's him," whispered a federal agent, zooming in on the surveillance feed. "The walk, the posture, it's Thorne." He had come to do the job himself, to see Alina's body with his own eyes. His paranoia had overruled his caution. Minutes later, the service door opened again. Two orderlies wheeled a gurney out, a form wrapped in blankets and straps. The van's rear doors opened. As they began to load the gurney, the figure in scrubs reappeared, holding a clipboard. He approached the van, his head tilting as if to check the patient's identity. This was the moment. "All units go." The alley exploded with light and sound. Powerful spotlights pinned the scene. The orderlies, undercover detectives, grabbed the man in scrubs, forcing him to the ground. The figure on the gurney sat up. It was a female detective. From rooftops and doorways, a swarm of tactical officers converged. There was no struggle. The man went limp, compliant. When they pulled off the surgical mask, they didn't find the hardened criminal mastermind they expected. They found a man in his late 50s with a gentle, forgettable face and tired eyes. He looked like an overworked accountant, not a kingpin. This was Aris Thorne. In his possession was a small, custom-made injector pen, loaded with a fatal dose of a synthetic opioid. Not a weapon for a fight, but a tool for a silent, clinical confirmation. He had come to administer the final dose himself, to be certain. Back at the Mitchell house, the call from Detective Hayes came as David was making breakfast. "It's over. We have him. It's really over." The relief that washed over David was so profound his knees buckled. He sank into a kitchen chair, the plastic spatula still in his hand, and cried for the first time since the diner. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Thorne, confronted with the mountain of evidence from the storage unit, the testimony of his captured crew, and the forensic trail, offered no defense. He simply shut down, a puppet with its strings cut. He pled guilty to a litany of charges including human trafficking, kidnapping, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Viktor Malikov, having provided crucial information, received a reduced but still substantial sentence. Officer Carter faced charges of corruption and conspiracy. The network began to crumble as law enforcement across state lines rolled up its operations. For Alina, Thorne's capture was the key that unlocked her future. With the architect of her nightmare permanently behind bars, the fear that had clamped her voice shut finally released. She decided to stay in the city. Using resources from a victim compensation fund, she enrolled in community college, aiming to become a counselor for survivors. She had weekly dinners with David and the triplets, who she called her brave little knights. She became, in a very real way, part of their family. David returned to work as a paramedic, but his life was indelibly changed. He became a vocal advocate for training first responders and the public to recognize the signs of human trafficking. He gave talks at community centers, telling the story of the napkin. The triplets, now 7, understood in a child's way that they had helped save someone. Their game of diner rescue became a point of family pride, a story they would someday tell their own children. But the most surprising detail, the one that truly closed the loop, came from Aris Thorne's past. Deep in the pre-sentencing investigation, a forensic psychologist dug into his history. Thorne hadn't always been a ghost. Decades earlier, he had been a promising logistics manager for a retail chain. He was fired after being accused of embezzling a small amount of money, an accusation he always denied. The experience, the report suggested, bred in him a deep, pathological resentment of systems and a twisted need to build a better, controlled system of his own, where he made all the rules. His criminal empire was, in a warped sense, a perverted proof of his own efficiency. He wasn't a monster born. He was a man corrupted by grievance and a hunger for absolute control. The story came full circle on the 1-year anniversary of the diner incident. David, Alina, and the triplets went back to the Liberty Bell Diner. They sat in the same booth. The manager, recognizing them, sent over a plate of free pancakes for the girls. This time the atmosphere was warm, filled with the easy laughter of a family. Chloe, with the solemnity of a judge, placed a new, clean napkin in the center of the table. On it, she had written in her best first-grade handwriting, "Thank you." It was a quiet victory. No salutes, no medals, no headlines. Just a paramedic, a survivor, and three little girls who had learned that courage sometimes means catching a falling napkin and telling your dad. The system, for all its flaws, had worked because individuals within it chose to be human first. The threat was gone, but the lesson remained. Evil often works in whispers and shadows, relying on our assumption that someone else will act. But hope can be just as quiet and just as powerful. It can be passed on a scrap of paper, recognized in a child's instinct, and acted upon by anyone brave enough to pay attention. That single act in a red vinyl booth created a chain reaction that toppled a criminal enterprise. But it started with something much simpler. One person seeing another person in need and choosing not to look away. So what does this story tell us? That monsters are real, yes, but so are heroes. And the line between a normal Thursday night and a life-altering moment is often just a matter of noticing. A flicker of fear in a stranger's eyes, a note where a note shouldn't be. We live in a world that teaches us to keep to ourselves, to avoid awkwardness, to scroll past the discomfort. But Alina's story and the Mitchell family's courage remind us that community isn't a vague idea. It's a verb. It's seeing the person right in front of you. Human trafficking, abuse, exploitation, they thrive in the shadows of our inattention. They rely on the assumption that no one will get involved. But as we've seen, the chain of salvation can start with anyone. A child's intuition, a parent's protective instinct, a paramedic's trained eye. You don't need to be a hero in the movie sense. You just need to be a human being who chooses to see. Learn the signs. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. That quiet voice inside you, that uneasy feeling, that's the first line of defense. Now I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever been in a public place and seen something that just didn't feel right? A dynamic between people that sent a chill down your spine? What did you do? Or perhaps you've been the person who needed someone to notice, and a stranger's kindness changed everything. Share your story in the comments below. These conversations matter. They build our awareness and our resolve. If this story of quiet courage resonated with you, please show your support. Hit the like button. It helps this video reach others who need to hear this message. Share it with a friend, a family member, or in a community group. You never know whose eyes it might open. And if you want to join us for more real stories that explore the depth of the human spirit, stories of resilience, justice, and the unexpected heroes among us, then please subscribe and tap the notification bell. We're just getting started. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being someone who pays attention. Remember, the world is changed by ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. See you in the next story.